Day 21, Forever Flasher. This will be brief because it's 2 a.m. and apologies for having such a simple circuit today, but this is not my circuit. It's again old as the hills. Many people have talked about it. I think originally it might have been written up in a lector. I'm not entirely sure who came up with it to begin with, but certainly a very old idea. The old LM 3909 used a very similar circuit, but basic problem is it's the forward voltage of a green lead exceeds 1.5 volts. So if you want to run it off a single cell, like a D cell or a AAA or something, then you have to have some kind of boost converter. This is a simple capacitive charging circuit. Basically what it does is it charges up a capacitor. As you can see through these two 27K resistors I've used, but the value isn't that critical. So the capacitor gets charged up. I've put the plus sign on the wrong side of the capacitor. Apologies, that polarity is wrong. It should be the other way around. But anyway, it charges up the capacitor to the supply voltage, which is 1.5 volts or thereabouts, and then it pulls the bottom end of the capacitor up to the positive rail, so that this point, because the voltage across the capacitance can't change immediately, then gets added to the 1.5 volt supply. So this point goes up to 3 volts and dumps the charge in the capacitor through the lead, making it flash. This trick works with red LEDs or green LEDs. Blue LEDs might be a bit of a problem because their voltage is starting to get above 3 volts, but red and green works fantastic with. Some red LEDs will actually light across 1.5 volts, but as the battery weakens, they'll start to dim and eventually go out. This circuit will make them flash until virtually the oscillator stalls. The oscillator itself, though, is kind of tricky how it works. Basically it watches the voltage on this point. So you can imagine at some point you've got to pull the gate of this transistor low. So that's what this transistor's job is. This NPN gets turned on by some base current and will pull down this PNP's gate and pull up this resistor here, which will then result in the dump through the LED. To do that, though, it's a little tricky. It's similar to the complementary pair. I mean, this is essentially a complementary pair that we've seen before. Once this starts turning on, then this voltage goes high quite quickly and gets pulled up. And as it goes up, this capacitor, again, the same trick, the capacitor's voltage won't change, and it will pull the base up and start dumping current into the base of this transistor and turn the thing on very quickly. But the reverse also happens. This is a 10 meg resistor, it's very large, and it slowly recharges this capacitor to the point where it'll actually shut the circuit back off again. I've looked at it on the Crow. It's actually quite interesting to watch it function. But these, 1 meg 5, 1 meg 5, just what I used. I think the original circuit used a meg and this was 10 meg, and can't remember what that value was. This capacitor was a bit smaller, but this capacitor here essentially controls the discharge pulse. If you just turned this on and left it on, you'd eventually exhaust the capacitor down to where the lead cuts off. And you can try that, and you can see the lead dims down. It takes probably a second or two before it completely discharges the 150 microfarad capacitor we've got here. But in this particular case, the circuit fairly quickly runs out of puff with this capacitor here and shuts down. Yeah, pretty clever. I suggest you build it and have a play with it, and you can play with the values. As you can see, I've got mine blinking quite slowly, which means it'll probably last forever. It pulls about 11 microamps, and then a pulse of current, which is actually hard to measure. I didn't put a resistor in and look at it on the Crow yet. But for a D cell like this, it'll probably last basically forever. This whole thing came out of a discussion on Twitter with a bunch of my friends who were talking about flasher circuits and my dislike of throwies, or those silly circuits where you stick a lead directly across a lithium cell and then stick a magnet to it and chuck it up on a metal structure that it'll stick to, etc. And I thought that was kind of a primitive waste of a lithium cell and a lead. It doesn't last very long, only lasts for a few hours, and then landfill or eventually falls off the bridge or something. With this, potentially it can go for years. I'm going to label this with the date that I built it, and we'll see how long it goes. It reminds me quite a lot of the old Pulse album, the Pink Floyd Pulse album. I'm quite a fan. Unfortunately, I wasn't a fan of Pink Floyd at the time. It took me a while to discover Pink Floyd, and I never got one of the original Pulse albums with the little pulsing circuit in it. I think they actually used an IC, whereas not a discrete circuit like this. It'll be interesting to see how long it lasts. I'm told that the Pulse albums lasted 5-10 years in some cases. So, well, this is a much bigger battery. I think they used a AA or AAA, whereas this may actually outlast me. I don't know. I didn't do the math, but I'm pretty sure it will probably last the shelf life. It's not a particularly high quality battery. This is just Ultracell made in China, as God knows. They're out from Audi. I think it cost like $1.50 or something for a pack of 2. Alrighty, yep, this is meant to be a quick one. Maybe some RF stuff tomorrow. I've still got to do the viewer's circuit special. Not entirely. I think I might leave that until after Christmas. I might make it on Boxing Day or something. I've got quite a lot of things I can talk about with that, both in viewers' circuits and all additional questions that people have asked me that I should probably talk about. Yeah, that's work and general Christmas stuff's been pretty busy, so apologies for not having a more interesting circuit for you tonight. I mean, this is actually quite an interesting circuit in its design. I've seen one with 2 transistors as well, which gets away, where it uses just like a complementary pair for pulling up one end of the LED. I haven't actually built it, and it's something that I must try. This one in particular I quite like because it's quiescent current, so the actual oscillator side of the system is set up to take very little current at all. So almost all of the current is only just the surge charging up the capacitor, and then a little pulse of current when it triggers, and most of the time it's only pulling a few tens of microamps, which means it'll last for a heck of a long time. There's lots of similar circuits out there. I'm sure if you Google, you'll probably find quite a few. You'll probably find quite a few astable multivibrators as well, which seems to be quite a popular way of flashing LEDs, but flashing LEDs for off 1.5 volts is a little bit more challenging. Maybe later on maybe not in this series, I've got a few other things I want to cover, but we might do one that can flash blue LEDs and large strings of LEDs, etc., with a little switcher supply. Alrighty, until then, good night.